session answers many of the questions that you might have. Right? So I'm going to now turn it over to Rita Cludarelli. Rita?
Hello again, everyone. As we begin this morning or this afternoon, as the case may be, we wanted to take some time to set the context for Dominican Veritas Ministries. So the purpose of DVM, this PJP as we call it, or Pontifical Public Juridic Person, is to embody the preaching and teaching mission of Jesus and St. Dominic in the Church through the ownership, management, and/or governance of collectively sponsored Dominican ministries and offering programs and services consistent with gospel imperatives. So who are we and what makes this network of schools so unique? So we've done some introductions and we have some sense of where we're all coming from, but just to sort of recap very quickly. We have sponsored schools, or soon to be sponsored schools by Dominican Veritas Ministries, which number 9. We have 9 schools. And in addition, we're looking at affiliated schools that will at some point be sponsored by DVM. So total, we're about 19 to 20 schools, and we're located in 10 states. We have 4 schools that include pre-K or TK to 8th grade. So our schools are located, as you heard, right, in Florida, Illinois, Minnesota, Texas, Wisconsin, but we also have schools that were not mentioned here today that are in California, Louisiana, Ohio, New York, and Tennessee. We recognize that the development of DVM and the DVM office have come about because our sponsoring congregations have seen the importance of greater collaboration, as well as the opportunity that this collaboration presents. They've expressed their desire to ensure the legacy of Dominican education, and they're facing their ever-changing demographics. So the establishment of DVM and the DVM office will support the continuation of Dominican education and mission through offering programs and services focused on our shared Dominican legacy and our shared Dominican future. So where are we in our planning? We've received feedback about the DVM office via surveys and through meetings and conversation with administrators as well as with you all as board members. Last week, we had meetings with administrators, which provided an opportunity for networking as well as great visioning for our future. Throughout next academic year, we'll be continuing to engage in dialogue to better inform our planning, to share information about progress, and to develop networking and relationship among schools. As was noted by Colleen earlier, the congregations who are represented here today, Adrian, Houston, and Cincinnati, are in the process of requesting what's called the votum from their local ordinary or bishop or archbishops where the schools are located. So where we are in the process is some things are being submitted, have been and will be in these coming weeks. And then that greater application to the Vatican, to the dicastery of sickle cell will happen this summer, June, July 2021. So that gives you a little bit of a snapshot of where we are, and we'll continue to keep you informed of the process and progress, as will your sponsoring congregations. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Kathleen.
Thank you, Rita. It's good to be with you again. I know for some of you, this is the first time that we've met, but for others, we did meet earlier a few weeks ago. And at that time, we explained the Veritas Ministries organizational structure. We're going to review that a little bit today, briefly, and get to kind of the heart of what is your role as board members and how does that relate to Dominican Veritas Ministries? You returned surveys to us, those of you who participated in that first gathering. And I want you to know we will use those comments for our planning, continued planning. You also had a few questions, and I'm going to take a minute or two to answer those before we get started today. One of the questions was, how will sisters be nominated to the DVM for approval? Currently, sisters are invited by the heads of school, local leadership to serve on the board, and the leadership team of the congregation approves them. Well, first of all, just a reminder, for the 21-22 school year, there are no changes. However, when you do become under the sponsorship of DVM, you will search out and vet potential board members, both sisters and lay people, as you have in the past. Now, the actual process for approval hasn't been determined yet. However, experience tells us that slates of potential board members can be set ahead of time to the appointing body. Congregations now, DVM later. This helps avoid selecting someone at the risk of them not being approved. So again, while that's not finalized, like I said, experience tells us that's a pretty good pattern. The second question was, what are we as a school board of trustees supposed to be doing now? We recently revised our bylaws as requested and directed by the sponsored council. Now, I know this is predominantly from the Cincinnati schools, and they have been working on their bylaws, and it was necessary in its setting up for DVM. For the rest of us, relax. Focus on your schools between now and the end of the year and getting it off on the school year in the fall. There will be some things in your bylaws that you need to tweak, and Larry will be going over that today. And we will take time next year to give you a template for that and to aid you in that process. So you can relax on that now and just know that you're going to have the assistance that you'll need later on. The last question was, my main issue is with governance. Who do we go to for approval? What do we go to that group for approval? Just what is it, you know? And that's what today is really about. We have created bylaws for Dominican Veritas Ministries Incorporated, the corporation. And we did share that with you. And that pretty much outlines exactly what is within the authority of the local board, what is within the authority of the trustees of DVM, and the member board of the DVM. Today, however, we are going to take all of that language and just give it to you briefly. How are those relationships going to be set up? So I'm happy to introduce to you Larry Singer. Larry is the civil lawyer that has been working with our committee, Dominican Veritas Ministries, for the last year. And I guarantee you, he is one person that will make it understandable. He also has the sophistication of a lawyer for those of you who are lawyers. But I'm happy to introduce you now, and he'll take you through the rest of the program today. Before I turn that over, sorry about that, I forgot this last night too. Because of the number of people that are on this Zoom, we do want to answer your questions today. So if you have a question, we would ask that you put it in the chat box, and then we'll collate those for Larry to answer during his program or at the end of his program. So Larry, you can take it over.
Thank you so much, Sister Kathleen, and good morning or afternoon to everyone. It really is an honor to be here, and it's an honor to work with the sisters and to get to know your schools a bit. And I really am sincerely in awe when you listen to the introductions that were made through Sister Colleen and all of you, And not only volunteering as board members, but having your children go to the school, you've gone to the school. I mean, these are lifelong commitments. And I think that really is special, and I think makes what we're trying to do here so terribly unique, but also so terribly important, because I think all of us understand that the sisters' desire to grow the ministry, strengthen the ministry, and really continue a legacy and continue what Dominican charism and Dominican education is all about is so very important and so deeply ingrained in all of us. I really, I've said this many times to them, so hopefully I'm not inflating their heads too much, but I really am such an admirer of what this step means, because I've worked with so many religious communities over the years. And oftentimes the ability to be so forward thinking and thinking about your sponsorship in such an intentional way, to planning when there's not a terrible event or demographic emergency, if you will, that is really calling this forward, but to be thoughtful, to develop leadership, to really put heart and soul behind it, I think just speaks so well of these communities and speaks so well of the ministries that they sponsor, and frankly also speaks so well of all of you and their partnership. So I do have some prepared remarks, and if the wonders of Zoom work for me, it'll all go well. So we're going to give that a try here. Let's see if I can just get, maybe it won't. Hang on one second. Let's try it again. And maybe the wonders of Zoom don't work for me. They worked so well last night. So let me give it one more shot here. Otherwise, I'll turn to my co-pilot. Okay, here we go. We're a little better maybe, or no?
That works. Just start it now, Larry.
All right, very good. Very good. Okay. Okay, we've all grown so much in technology, but I use that as sort of the papal we. It does not include me. I have not grown in technology. I'm still fumbling along, but it seems to be working okay now. So thank you for your patience. So I've got really 3 or 4 goals that I'd like to achieve in our time together. And the first is I want to just talk very briefly, and I think this is old hat for most of you, but begin with taking a quick look at the canonical and civil law structure that encapsulates DVM and the relationship with the schools. Secondly, I want to make this very real for all of you and really try to address the questions that I imagine in your mind. And so we're going to focus really on the authorities, if you will, or the relationship between the schools and the DVM members and the DVM board. And then, as Sister Kathleen said, we're also going to talk about the role of the school boards and try to address as many questions as you have. I know Zoom with 40-some people turns us into a little bit more of a lecture than a conversation, but I really am hoping that I can provide the guidance and address the issues that you might have, and also, frankly, take the feedback from all of you that'll be helpful for me and the sisters as we continue to move forward. I think most, if not all of you, have seen this picture before, and I'll walk you through in a minute, but I want to just make a brief introductory comment and just share with you how I approach sort of the DVM project, if you will. And really, it's trying to balance 3 things, and I hope that you'll see that this has been our goal as I make more prepared remarks. And I hope it'll provide some guidance and hopefully some comfort, at least, in what we're trying to achieve. And so the balance really begins with, we're trying to address and be responsive to, supportive of the canonical requirements that go with a change of sponsorship like this. And so the sisters have really been very fortunate to work with Sister Peggy Martin, who's really one of the leading canon lawyers in this area. And so there are, as you'd imagine, some very specific requirements and sound advice that needs to be followed in order to effectuate this transfer of sponsorship and really address the sorts of things that the local bishops as well as Rome would be looking for. And so a lot of the DVM corporate structure, if you will, sort of follows those canonical requirements. Secondly, as we talk about sort of civil law issues that come into play, really by the blue box that's here in the picture, we want to be good stewards, if you will, from a civil law perspective and take sound canonical and legal advice into account when we establish the structural relationship that's encapsulated here. And then finally, and I think equally important, it's all of our goal to make certain that we've created a workable structure that doesn't unnecessarily impinge upon decision-making, that does not create unneeded layers of decision-making, that allows the organizations to continue to be as effective, efficient, and responsive as they possibly can. And so that's been an overarching goal as well. So when we look at this picture, you'll see on the top left, sort of in the, I don't know, orangish, grayish, beigeish, whatever color you want to call that, circle is Dominican Veritas Ministries Pontifical Juridic Person. So this is essentially a church law structure, if you will. You could sort of think of it as a church law corporation, if you will, that allows for this PJP to assume sponsorship in the name of the church of the ministries that will be under it. It's not that in and of itself is not a corporation that would be recognized under civil law. We know to operate effectively in our country, both to address liability exposure concerns, to address banking issues, tax issues, all sorts of things, that it's very, very helpful to have a civil law structure around that. And so we will be incorporating an entity called the Dominican Veritas Ministries, Inc., through which all of the PJP activities from a civil law perspective will be operated out of. And the way that we're going to assure fidelity to that PJP is we're going to take the members of the PJP, and that's envisioned to be an individual from each congregation that will be working with DVM, and give them some authorities over the civil law corporation, very similar to what you now have with your high schools vis-a-vis the religious congregations that sponsor you. And then within DVM Ministries, we're also, by necessity and appropriateness, going to have a board of directors, or we're calling it a trustee board, of anywhere from 6 to 11 individuals that will be appointed by the DVM members and will be responsible for fulfilling the fiduciary and oversight responsibilities of DVM that have not been reserved to the DVM members. And then finally, down at the school level, we would have DVM Inc. become the member of the school. So this is a substitution, if you will, of the sponsoring congregation, its membership rights now with DVM. And obviously a local board of directors, and as we'll talk about, and as I hope you'll agree, that board of directors responsibilities, if they're not identical, they're pretty darn close to it, I hope, what they currently have right now. So I wanted to start at the top layer, if you will, and talk about the responsibilities that the DVM members, the same individuals who are going to be the members of the public juridic person, directly appointed, at least at the beginning, by the religious congregations who's transferring their ministries to DVM, what authorities they're going to have over the schools themselves. And so I'll say a word about this list. I think my overarching comment as we begin this sort of segment of the presentation would be, I think if you look at the specific authorities that we're going to talk about with respect to the DVM members and then ultimately the DVM Board of Trustees, I believe they're going to look very familiar to you. They should look, again, almost identical or pretty close to those responsibilities that the religious congregation that sponsors your school currently has. And so these are the responsibilities, if you will, that that highest level in the organization, the members of DVM, the members of the PJP are going to be maintaining over the schools, to adopt, amend the mission, philosophy statements of the schools. I think you understand the importance of that, because we want to assure that the schools continue to be faithful to a Dominican charism, to require an assessment of the school's mission effectiveness, and to ensure Catholic identity and Dominican formation in the schools. And, you know, I'm personally envisioning that this would be a much more integrated program across the schools. One of the advantages, and we talked about this in last night's presentation, and I'll make the same comment now, You know, if you think about Catholic schools, not that many years ago, but certainly when they were started, the term sponsorship never was really used. It actually is kind of a made-up word to describe the relationship between the religious congregation or the recognized church entity, if you will, and the particular ministry. But sort of, if you'll forgive the loose phrasing, sort of back in the day, you know, we didn't need that term because you went into the school, the sisters were the teachers, the sisters were the administrators, the sisters were the janitors, the sisters raised the money, the sisters did everything. And so there was no question about the Catholicity of the school, nor the particular charism within the school, because there they were. As needs have changed, as Vatican II has invited the laity into the ministry, as interests within religious congregations and ability to staff schools have changed, as more parents like yourself and lay board members really want to become involved, we've really introduced the concept of sponsorship to encapsulate that relationship, if you will. And I think part and parcel of that, and for me at least, I see this movement to DVM as sort of continuing the journey. It does require that being much more intentional about how mission effectiveness is created and overseen, how Dominican formation is inculcated within the school. We can't just rely upon the sisters. We've got to have a mechanism where the laity, really all of you and your successors and their successors and so on, really understand what the purpose is, what the founding principles, what the culture of the school is, and so forth. And so being very intentional about that is important. And the power of bringing ultimately 1920 schools together to work on that, I think is really significant. So you can see why I hope after that little colloquy, why having these two authorities, if you will, responsibilities flow to the highest level makes sense. And then the last bullet point on this slide really goes to an issue that it's hard to imagine ever occurring, but I think we'd agree is an important safety valve, which is if there ever should come a time where an individual school board is making a decision that is mission critical, maybe it has to do with mission and philosophy or the way that that is enacted within the school. And it raises issues at the highest level within the PJP members about that decision. We're allowing those members to invite the school to reconsider that decision. Again, it's hard to imagine how that would occur, but I think it's important to allow for that sort of dialogue in the event that it ever should. A couple other authorities as well, and some of these flow directly from canon law. There will be policies that are adopted with respect to the school borrowing over certain limits. There are actually canonical requirements that be in place. Similarly, and along the same lines, there will be policies with respect to contracts exceeding certain limits. So some, for example, that would be within the school's prerogative, some that would flow up to the DVM Board of Trustees, and some of them, again, that might flow up to this very highest level of the organization if they're that significant. The last few, I think, make kind of logical sense. In the event that there would be a merger or sale or anything like that of the school, we want the PJP, if you will, the members of DVM to have approval process in that. Whether an organization joins DVM in the future or leaves DVM, approval for that. I'll do legal action in a minute. And obviously in the hopefully never event that a school were dissolved, we want that to be addressed at the highest level as well. We're also asking that legal action being taken by a school, depending upon the construct of that litigation, would also flow up to the highest level. So there will be a similar policy that I described, at least I'm envisioning, with respect to the contracts, where certain types of litigation might be at the school level, certain might be at the DVM level, and something significant. For example, again, just lawyers, and I think we might have some on the phone, we're trained to think of the parade of horribles. If you could imagine, which actually has occurred here in the Chicago diocese years ago, where a religious congregation threatened to bring suit against the Archdiocese of Chicago. That would clearly be something that we want to flow up to the highest level of the organization. So those are the sorts of things we're trying to think through and provide some protection for. And then with respect to the DVM Board of Trustees and the authorities, responsibilities that it would maintain, we're envisioning that the list that I just went through is going to flow through the DVM Board of Trustees first, along with that board having the ability, without it flowing higher, to approve, amend articles and bylaws of the particular school, to appoint and remove school board members, to approve the school president, and to approve the school budget. Again, I'll sort of go back to the comment I made at the beginning. I believe that the list that I've shown on these slides really encapsulates the current body of reserve powers that are maintained by the religious congregations right now. I want to call out for you two specific things that are limitations upon DVM's authority. The first is that I believe all of you know, as a nonprofit tax exempt organization, you have to be careful in the event of dissolution about what happens to those charitable assets. And we are requiring that that be a conversation between the sponsor, the current sponsor now, and the school, and that that decision be made in the unlikely, hopefully never event that the school be dissolved, that decision be made, and that DVM not have an ability to change that decision. So whatever the conversation is, the assets in that unlikely event go to the religious congregation, the assets go to some local foundation, whatever that would be, that's going to be settled between you and your sponsor. And then secondly, and apologize for the typo here, and I saw it last night and didn't change it, so there's something about it I guess I like. But we also, this structure is being set up so that we're not going to be able to transfer assets and liabilities across the school. The boards, as we're going to talk about in a minute, have full fiduciary responsibility for the financial viability and strength of the school. So DVM will not be able to transfer assets in. It will not be able to transfer liabilities across any of the schools, except in the context where there might be a sale or merger or dissolution. We feel at that point where the conversation is really going to that level, that the DVM board has a little stronger role to play here with respect to the assets and liabilities in those particular situations. But short of that, it really is the board's responsibility to make certain that the school continues to operate in a financially strong manner. And then lastly, and I think I've kind of wove this into my remarks that I've made already, but I just want to reiterate to you with respect to the school board's role. I mean, this is a full fiduciary board of directors at the school level. And I hope that that has come through in my comments, and I hope that that's come through in the way that we've structured the responsibilities. And I do believe, and I've not looked at every single set of bylaws, but I've looked at quite a few across the ministry, that the roles and responsibilities are largely unchanged from what's going on in the current structure, other than we've got DVM playing a role where now the historical sponsor has played a role. And so with that, Sister Kathleen, I'll stop. I know if there are questions in the chat, I'm happy to take those. And if we have time, I'm happy to address questions orally as well. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Larry. We did have one question that has come through already. And again, if anybody has any others, feel free to put them in the chat. The question is this: there are times when there is a disagreement amongst Catholic organizations. In those instances, who would be dictating those policies or stances? For example, stances on LGBTQ, women in the church, welcoming divorces, refugee support, a lot of the social justice, I'll just put it that way. Do these topics and stances come under the purview of DVM?
You want me to answer that, or do you want to answer that?
You know, I guess I will begin, but I would be happy if any of the other congregational leaders would join in on this one. We have to remember that the bishop in a diocese has responsibility for Catholic education within the diocese. DVM does not take that away from that particular bishop. in the best of worlds, there's dialogues between sponsoring congregations and the bishops to work out understandings. And I know there's been an example, for instance, of the Jesuit congregation standing against the bishop in Indianapolis on an LGBTQ stance. And we saw, I think, the worst effect that can happen with that. I mean, if we took a stand, no matter who's taking it, DVM or the school, you know, the bishop could say, you're no longer a Catholic school. The bishop could say, the congregation can't operate in my diocese. So, you know, when push comes to shove, this structure won't alleviate those kinds of conflicts. I do think the DVM member board will be looking at social justice stands. And again, they're not formed yet, but that will happen, and statements. And I think they would certainly help navigate those waters with the bishop. But when push comes to shove, the bishops are responsible for Catholic education in the diocese.
The only
Anybody
thing,
else want
Sister
to add to that?
Well, I'd like the other sisters, but I'll make one comment just quickly, because I think you eloquently sort of phrased it. It's just important to remember that the bishops are, you know, Rita mentioned this votum. So the bishops are giving their approval, their authorization, their okay, however you want to say it, for DVM to be formed and for this sponsorship to occur. So you're starting from a position of trust. And I think that's really important to understand. It doesn't, I'm not naive. It doesn't mean that there won't be issues that could come up, but the DVM transfer is not being forced on anyone. And so they're welcoming DVM sponsorship into the diocese, and hopefully that will allow the dialogue that Sister Kathleen has talked about to occur.
I'll give my or whatever I have in my
2
heart.
cents.
Yes, my 2 cents, 1.5 cents. I agree with Kathleen that when we are in a particular diocese, they do have an ability to say who is in the Catholic directory from their diocese. They don't have the ability to say who can function, period, in their diocese, and who can function under the traditions of a Dominican charism. Now, we want to be in communion with the larger church. We are a pontifical group. So that's why we are going to Rome for our for this DVD. So we're not specifically under any one diocese, but the schools within that diocese that bishop does have responsibility over the schools in specifically his diocese at that point. I think our role is to keep a dialogue going. You know, I think that we have a responsibility as Dominicans, as educators, to help move the theological story of what today's contemporary education might look like in the Catholic Church. And my hope is that the bishops would come to us saying, what should we do about these issues? I worked in healthcare. My history has been in healthcare. And I always wanted to be the go-to person for the bishop in that area who was very open-minded and would listen for ethical issues, so that I could share with him what the gospel tradition might say about certain ethical issues, because they're going to hear all kinds of views. And I wanted to be the trusting partner that he could listen to about possibilities. And I think that's the same in education. They're going to be hearing the loudest voices. And we don't want to be a big, huge, loud voice, but when it comes to Catholic social teachings, et cetera, we have some tradition behind us. So I think this can be an advantage of having an organization across diocesan lines to give more thought and more ideas.
I'd like to just maybe add one more thing to what Colleen said. I think it's going to be really important for us as this, when we start looking at this original members group, of which we know we have 5 right now, 3 of us are on this call. But it's important for us, we have to look at also some of the qualities we have to assure that this body has, or we maintain that, make sure that we get what we need in order to. So theology, ethics, formation, all of those things are going to be important so that we can hold true as Dominicans to Catholic social teaching and be able to express that into the future. So I think being sure that, you know, we have those people available to us or they're on the board, and assuring that people, as they move on to this DVM board, have the formation they need to continue what we want as Dominicans into the future. So I don't know if that helps, but that's kind of just a little add-on.
Thank you, Donna. We have one more question that has come up. How and at what point in the timeline will the pre-approved limits be set for contracts and debt?
Well, I can say a brief word on that. You know, we still have a ways to go in the DVM journey, as I think you know, and we've really held off on a lot of the civil law aspects, like DVM is not incorporated yet, just to let the Rome filing go forward and get any feedback that might impact us. So we're a ways into the future. I can't imagine that we would be having this conversation until we've really got our DVM board in place, because there's an easy answer to the question, which are defined canonical thresholds in which it would have to move up the chain. And those are, I think, $3 million or more of debt right now, but it's very diocesan specific, depends on the size of the diocese. So whatever those dollar limits are, you know, those have to come into play. And so that's certainly one touch point, if you will. But what makes sense for a particular institution and what the role of the DVM Board of Trustees should be, I think we really need to have their guidance for. So I see this coming as it's rolled out, but we're a ways in the future before I could really provide you a definitive answer. Is that a fair comment, Sister Kathleen?
I definitely think so. And just a reminder, one of the things we said in our first session was that we were going to be submitting the paperwork for the approval of the PJP. And that is going to be a year at the minimum, 2 years, who knows how long, because it just doesn't move that fast through the Vatican. So we do have some time to be able to set those things up and to let you know in enough time that you can make good decisions too. Any other questions or comments? Has this been helpful? Larry has agreed that we can send you this PowerPoint. So that might be helpful for you too, to review that. But I think everybody's saying that this has been helpful, so that's good. Listen, if you have any questions, if you have any concerns as we go forward, you have Rita's email. So she can funnel that to whoever needs to, you know, to have that information. And as we go into next year, again, we will be guiding you and helping you make necessary changes in bylaws. as your congregational leaders will want to work with you to make sure the dissolution clauses are solid for what you as a school and what that congregation wants before you come into DVM, because that is significant. So we will take time to do that for you. And we look forward to partnering with you in furthering Dominican education. I think this is an exciting time for all of us, pulls at the heartstrings for sure, but it is the kind of forward planning that I think will benefit the students in our schools and all of those who are working with the schools. We'll stay on the Zoom a little bit longer if you want to hang out or ask any other questions, but thank you for your time today, and this will conclude our program.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks.
I think Susan is still on if you want to answer the, I don't know if
Oh, yes, Susan, there really, there's not, the question is, what is the reason behind monitoring schools receiving donations? I think in general, we won't be, but just like you usually have a gift policy in a school that, you know, is appropriate to take it for the school's sake, there might be something, but we haven't even discussed that for DVM Incorporated, I don't think, have we? Or is that something I
No.
missed, Larry?
But that's usually something that we, you know, in large organizations, that you want to make sure that the gifts are appropriate, meaning that there are no strings attached
Yeah.
that might be a problem in the
Yeah, or
future.
taking something in conflict with your, values.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Okay, understand, that makes sense. Thank you.
Mhm.
You're
Yeah,
welcome.
Susan, good seeing you.
Good seeing you, sister. So that was it for me. This is a great presentation. Thank you so much. Very informative. I might be the last participant, so I should leave.
Okay.
before- Holding you
Thank you.
longer than you probably,
Really.
intended to be on this.
No, actually, this is,
No,
we're
thank
still
you.
under an hour,
Yeah.
so we're in good shape.
Yeah.
Thank you very
Okay.
much.
So that was
Thank
me.
you.
I'll
Thank
see,
you.
I hope I see you next week.
Thank you.
Yes, you will.
Okay, good.
Thank you, Sister Di. Take care. Cheers. Thank you all.
Mm.
Bye-bye.